Welcome to the first devlog for my dungeon crawler roguelike game. Over the past 4 months, I've been working on a dungeon crawler roguelike based off the Etrian Odyssey series. Apart from the typical grid-like first-person dungeon crawler, Etrian Odyssey also had a feature where you could draw your own map. My plan is to incorporate random dungeon generation and map making together so that you could create your own map to solve puzzles generated by the game. To start off, I used a dungeon crawler template from Heartbeast's dungeon crawling tutorial as a base to start off. While this was a great start, I wanted the walls of the dungeon to match how Etrian Odyssey creates their dungeon walls. Taking a look how Etrian Odyssey designs their dungeon walls, they seem to be a flat texture acting as a wall with decorations on the side. I could do something similar by taking a photo of what I want to be the background to be, and put it as a flat one-way texture. After that, I would add the 3D models to the center to create one wall. While the concept is similar to Etrian Odyssey, it's still a bit different and I would like to go back and improve this in the future. Putting it all together, I could create the walls of a dungeon to create the illusion that you are in a forest. If we take away the models, you could see the trick behind it all, which is just a repeating texture in the background. Though if we compare my walls with the later 3D Etrian Odyssey entries, I feel like my walls are a bit lacking. I think it might have to do with the different background textures they have and how they have a much better depth compared to mine. Here are some early builds of the game. The first version I made had too much saturation for the textures, so I had to lower it a bit to make it feel more like a background. In the next build I added some basic combat and had the combat UI on the top screen. While it looks alright, I was having issue when I was playing on the mobile since the buttons were too small, so I increased the button size in the next version. I also reduced the map size to make it easier to draw on mobile. For this version, the combat buttons didn't seem large enough still for a mobile game, so I opted to move the buttons to where the movement controls are, as those buttons were not being used during combat. Also, in this version, I added more characters and enemies and started implementing a stat UI page for the characters. For the combat, I made it similar to the Etrian Odyssey, where the players would decide what actions to take for all their characters before the action happens. After playing with it a while, I ended up changing this in the end as it could feel confusing at times, since there is no instant feedback on what was happening until after you select all the character action. I instead changed it to immediately perform an action after you selected one. This makes it more intuitive for players. This is the current version of where I have it now. The dungeon is generated based off of an algorithm from user Fu Fochmar, who created an Etrian Odyssey dungeon generator. I had to translate their code from Racket to Python to understand how it works, then translate it from Python to Go.script, where it is currently at. Currently, the game will generate a 7x7 room with stairs, enemies, chests, and shortcuts, which then are placed in the world. The map generation result looks exactly the same as how the player would draw it. This is so that in the future I could also implement auto mapping for some quality of life features. Players can draw on the map as well and place icons to indicate points of interest. I do think the map is a bit small for mobile, so I will need to implement a way to zoom in and out like they do in the Etrian Odyssey series. I simplified the map drawing to only need to place down tiles as opposed to drawing the walls as well like in the Etrian Odyssey series. This might be a small issue, but with just tiles, it's hard to differentiate between dead ends and path, but I think that's a small enough issue to leave for now. As for the combat, I polished up the UI to display status effects, enemy intent, the stats of each character when you click them, as well as special effects to attacks. Originally, you could move around the party members during battle, but with the enemy intent mechanic, I felt like players would spend too much time trying to game the intent mechanic by moving their characters around to get an optimal attack pattern rather than focusing on the fight. Perhaps that's something I could play around with in the future, but for now I'll leave it as is. Currently, I have all the attacks set to automatically target an enemy and the player cannot choose a target. I did this since this was the easiest to implement, but I would like to add manual targeting in the future as attacks that automatically target can cause problems in the future. For example, if there's multiple enemies and you need to target a specific one, but none of your attacks can target that specific one, can be frustrating. Similar to Etrian Odyssey, I've implemented a weakness system. All weaknesses are displayed before you attack an enemy, showing which element or element that you will be applying and how effective it will be against the enemy. You have your basic element types as well as your physical damage types. Then you have binds and elements, which are various forms of stopping the enemy from attacking or more ways of dealing more damage. When you try and apply an element or bind, there's a % chance it will succeed. To make it less frustrating to the player when you fail to land an element, I would raise the chance of the next one succeeding. This effect is conveniently displayed on the UI to show the player. Also, I made it harder for the player to keep using the same element each time. After landing one successfully, the enemy will become immune to it for a few times and then have a new permanent resistance to it. The resistance stacks each time the player lands the same element, making it harder and harder to land the same one again and again. After a player has won a fight, I added a reward screen for the players to gain new skills or characters. It's very basic and it was quick to implement, and it's far easier than making a skill tree. Since this is a roguelike game, I think it's fine to leave this reward system the way it is for now, but I might want to go back and add a skill tree. When a player's party is defeated, I have it set for them to respawn on the first floor, but there's a catch. The map stays exactly the same, so your drawn map will be useful here as well. Any enemies and chests respawn in the same location, so if you kept track of them, you will be able to find them again easily. There are many things that I would like to improve on and add to my game, so stay tuned in the future for more updates.